Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to my first review in a very, very long time. And as another first, you'll be seeing the real me for just a bit on a crappy camera with crappy lighting. So I apologize for that. Now let's get into the review. ReCore was one of the most anticipated titles announced at the past E3. Unfortunately, after its launch, the critics' response can be summed up to, "It kinda sucks." Obviously, I was very disappointed and actually confused in hearing this. It was absolutely the hype talking, but I did not want to believe how bad the ratings were, so I decided to review it myself. My question is, was ReCore really that bad? Now, one of the biggest draws to the game was the fact that it was being designed by Mark Pacini, who was the lead designer behind the Metroid Prime series. Unfortunately, it was developed with two studios. Armature Studios, which was created by Mark Pacini, and Concept. Get ready for this. Concept were the developers behind Mighty Number 9. Yeah, I think that explains a lot. It's also important to note that many of the influences on ReCore's gameplay come from the Metroid Prime series and Mega Man. Imagine that. ReCore takes place on a desolate desert planet known as Far Eden. I have to say, at a far distance, the game world looks pretty beautiful. That is until you take a much closer look. What I mean by that is, you will definitely notice that the texture and graphic quality on the Xbox One version are inferior to the PC version. ReCore is an open world game, but even with that, it's kinda small. I will get to more of that later, but let's continue on to the story. The one thing I really enjoyed not having in this game was a lot of long drawn out, boring cutscenes. Outside of the cutscenes, some of the story was even presented in a very odd way. At almost random points in the game, there came this out-of-place narration from the lead character, Jules' father. The thing is, ReCore does have audio logs spread out all over the world to convey other story details. Why didn't they just make all the narration from her father in unavoidable audio logs spread out amongst the game like breadcrumbs? I don't get it. Basically, the concept of the story is that most of Earth was wiped out by a virus. The survivors of the human race went into cryosleep aboard ships that currently orbit Far Eden, waiting for the planet to be terraformed. But of course, things did not go as planned. Overall, the story in ReCore isn't that original, but it's intriguing enough to care about and continue playing. Moving on to the gameplay, one of the main points that we saw during E3 was being able to pull out enemy cores. Extracting cores turns out to be quite satisfying, and it can also be very challenging during battle. Sometimes you even have to choose between which enemies you take cores from and which ones you flat out destroy. The shooting mechanics of ReCore do feel very faithful to Metroid Prime, and the color mechanics aren't anything new, as that's also taken from Metroid Prime. They may not be very innovative, but it is certainly welcomed back. The platforming gameplay in ReCore I found was really well designed and implemented. The game also has very responsive controls that add to the already fun and challenging platforming. Now we move into another main point of the gameplay, the Corebots. They include the K9 frame that can dig and find resources, and has a ramming attack that can damage and disrupt enemies. Next we have the SPDR. This frame is used for riding on rails and has a ranged attack. The AP3 can break large glowing rocks, and for combat has a strong melee and AoE attack. The FL1R can let Jewel glide through the air, can use heat vents to get more air, and also has a ranged attack. The last frame, TN8K, isn't even in the game, but will be soon. Unfortunately, it's too late. It's just too late. It should have been out when the game was released. The Corebots that are in the game can be upgraded with blueprints and from finding parts that are either scattered in the world or from fallen enemies. The blueprints to build certain parts can be found in large boxes also scattered in the world and in dungeons. I honestly thought that the Corebot upgrading system was another very well implemented aspect of the game. Now, if you didn't already know, ReCore is a collectathon game, and that itself seemed to be a negative point in most other reviews. I honestly haven't played one of those games in a very long time, so I was really alright with this approach. I'll admit it was actually satisfying to find prismatic cores. By the way, the prismatic cores are pretty much like the Jiggies from Banjo-Kazooie. They open doors and dungeons and new areas. Going back to the beginning when I said ReCore was an open world game but was unfortunately small, that aside, the game actually did a fair job in rewarding the player for exploring. Moving on to the dungeons. Some dungeons are used for the progression of the main story, and others are known as challenge dungeons. Alright, let me tell you, the name Challenge Dungeons does not even say enough. Completing all the objectives in one go is extremely difficult. Now, we'll get to all the bad and ugly of ReCore. Still on the challenge dungeons, the one thing that you cannot do is pause and start over again. You either have to finish the dungeon, regardless of what challenges you don't complete, or spend a hell of a lot of time going back to the main menu and re-entering the game. All I can say is, this is a horrendous oversight and complete bullshit that this was not in the game. After trying to fully complete just one challenge dungeon, I gave up because it just wasn't worth it at all. Going back to our missing Korbot, there's actually an unreleased dungeon that requires that Korbot to complete it. So that clearly tells me this game is unfinished. And that's not the only thing that shows that. Toward the end of the game, ReCore completely drops the concept of open world and exploration for 4 linear levels that contain platforming and combat. And then after that's done, you have a final boss battle, then the game ends. And that's it. I mean, you can explore more, try to beat more ridiculous challenges, but there's really no reason to. So yeah, the game's really short. ReCore also suffers from the occasional glitches, and of course the frame rate drops on the Xbox One are always below 30 FPS. Load times are really bad, like worse than Bloodborne's launch, but is supposedly getting fixed this week. Clearly this game is unfinished. What a disappointment. Don't get me wrong though, ReCore does have some aspects of a good game, but it's buried way too deep in its problems. Well, at least it costs $20 less than your average AAA title, right? Well, yeah, but obviously that does not fix the ever-present issues. Despite all that's been said here, if you enjoy challenging games with good platforming, I would recommend ReCore, but only during a sale and only on the PC. That way in the PC version you have the load times the way they should be, and better graphics depending on your system. ReCore is obviously an unfinished game that cannot be saved by just a few good aspects. ReCore earns a 2.5 out of 5. After Sony's blunder with the PlayStation Pro, is this really what you were spawned with, Microsoft? You guys need to get your shit together. Alright, so on that wonderful note, that'll be the end of the review. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and comment if you have anything to say about ReCore, which I think a lot of people would have something to say about it. Anyway, I'll see you all next time. Have a good one out there.